Sorry to break everybody up, all the great conversations that are going on here today, but it is time to start our program, and we've got a lot of room to cover. So I'd like everybody to go ahead and take your seats, get ready. Hopefully we got the Zoom. Welcome everybody that's online. My name is Alan Bird. I am owner of Alan Bird & Associates, and I'm here today to moderate this program to shed a little bit of light on one of the constitutional amendments that will be on our ballot. Now, let me take a random guess. Somebody shout out, how many days is it till the first vote is cast? Who said 15?
70.
Right there. 15 days. Military ballots, overseas ballots are sent out 45 days before November 3rd. So we are 2 weeks away from the start of the election here in Florida. And we want to make sure that our membership and our guests here are as informed as possible. So we decided we'd take one of the amendments, because a lot of people aren't talking about amendments because there's this big race at the top of the ballot that seems to be capturing everybody's attention that we will not mention today. And just give a little bit of information about Amendment 3, which has the best sounding name of just about any ballot since Pregnant Pigs, Jungle Primaries. So, and with that, I'm going to bring up two experts in this and to kind of talk a little bit about it. First of all, with the pro side, let's give a nice round of applause for Steve Vanacore. And then finally, let's give a nice round of applause for Jesse Phillips, GOP chairman or state committeeman here in Seminole County. All right, so each of you have microphones. Make sure that you talk kind of into them. I see, Steve, if you can turn yours a little bit closer to you and down to make sure it picks up. And Steve, I'm just going to turn it over to you for a first minute or two. Talk about, you could take off your mask now, absolutely. We're all 6 feet apart, socially distanced up here. And go ahead and talk a little bit about the Amendment 3 and what it does from a pro side.
You guys happen to be very lucky. I know you're lucky because you live in this great little community, but you're lucky because you're one of only 2 Senate seats that you get the chance to vote for the person who will head to Tallahassee and represent you in the Florida Senate. Most Senate seats already been decided. There's 21 that are on the ballot this year statewide, and 19 of the 21 have all but been decided. So what's the problem? The problem is that in most elections, for the people who represent you in Tallahassee, represent the citizens of the state of Florida, and by most, I mean almost every single one, the election is decided by a tiny sliver of the electorate. How many of you are registered to vote? So most of you, except in this Senate race, most Floridians are legally prohibited, statutorily prevented. If they're registered qualified voters, they're statutorily prohibited from voting for the person that will represent them in Tallahassee. So what happens? So I've run well over 300 campaigns in my career. Most of those races, my advice to my client is, if it's a state legislative race, you only have to appeal to the far left, or you only have to appeal to the far right. Now, what does that lead to? It leads to stagnation, it leads to hyperpartisanship, it leads to a lack of consensus building. It means people have to suspend their own principles or the needs of their district because they only have to worry about the far left or the far right. What's the promise? The promise of Amendment 3, it's called the All Voters Vote Initiative, because in taxpayer-funded elections, it's a simple premise. The premise is, if you're paying for these elections and these people are being paid out of your tax dollars to represent you, you should have the opportunity to say to them, okay, you're doing a good job, you can go back. Or you're not doing a good job and I'm going to vote for your replacement. You don't get to do that in almost every single election. In the Florida House of Representatives, there's 120 House seats. 110 of them are functionally over right now. Yeah, there's some named candidates, there's some write-ins, there's some people from other parties, but once you gerrymander those districts, those races are decided where you don't get a chance to vote. And the All Voters Vote Amendment, common usage all over the country, it's proven to be successful. Believe it or not, it's very commonly used in the state of Florida, and we'll talk more about that. And thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Jesse? Go ahead.
Thank you, Alan, and thank you guys for attending on Zoom or in person, and for this opportunity to talk about what I believe is a terrible idea that we're being offered to vote for. Both parties have come out against this, and the reason is we have a time-honored tradition in our country of having a meaningful choice in November between people of different parties, and guaranteeing to both people of the major parties and also people who choose not to identify as a party. You, as a resident of the state of Florida, if you're not a member of a party, you can go and you can put your name on a ballot and you can participate in a meaningful way in a November election. That is guaranteed to you. Or you can go and you can form a small party. We have a Libertarian Party, we have an Independent Party, and you have a right to get together with your friends and nominate your own candidate and ensure that they are on the November ballot. There's a lot of problems. I think that we'll agree with our problems. The issue is, what's the best solution? I have some ideas about a solution. I don't think this is a very good solution, particularly because of my concern about how political consultants and other paid operatives, there's not enough safeguards in this to protect against some shenanigans that will very easily be engaged in by people to try to lock different parties out of the November election ballot. So we'll talk about that a little bit more, but last night, the Republican Party of Florida, our executive board, which I'm on, we voted unanimously to oppose this in order to preserve the right of grassroots voters throughout, really of both parties, to have meaningful votes in both the general and primary elections.
But Jesse, let me just kind of post this in both of you. First, thank you for sharing your positions. But aren't we talking about making it easier to vote? Isn't that a goal that we should be working towards? Jesse?
It is, and it's incredibly easy to vote. There's so many ways that you can vote. You can vote by mail, you can vote at early voting, you can vote on election day. You have a month to vote, or actually more than that if you're military overseas. So look, as I tell my kids, if something is not important, my kids will often tell me, hey, I couldn't do it. I'm like, no, you could do it. You just chose not to do it, right? If you have a month to do something and you don't do it, that's because you don't want to do it. And if you want to vote in primaries, it's incredibly easy to vote in primaries. All you have to do is check a box when you go to register to vote indicating, I want to vote in that party's primaries. Nobody is being locked out of anything. People are making choices not to become a member of a private organization, which means that you don't get to choose who the leaders of that private organization are. The political parties are private organizations, and we have the right to set our own rules of how we choose our leadership. Anybody can join this private organization. Nobody's being kept from doing that. And the ramifications of this is that it's going to be harder for MPA people and unaffiliated voters to get an MPA candidate on the ballot, where now you're going to have to win a primary election just to be able to participate in the general election, versus right now, I can go put my name on a ballot, pay the fee that everybody else pays, and I'm on the ballot guaranteed in November as an independent candidate. This amendment does away with that ability to participate in that way.
Steve?
Jesse's exactly right. The Democratic Party and the Republican Party are private organizations. But where they, I believe, cross the line from a group like your chamber, the public shouldn't be coming in here to vote for who should be on your board of directors. But if you have two private organizations that have a monopoly, as it were, on the electoral process, Jesse talked about, well, you could change parties. You know, we live at a time, let me finish the thought on the private organizations, but your tax dollars are funding their private elections. Your tax dollars are saying that we're going to exclude 3.7 million people who choose not to belong to a party, and that's their American right. We have a constitution that protects your right to associate with whom you want to associate with. And if you choose, like a growing number of people are saying, I don't want to be a Democrat, I think they're too far to the left, I don't want to be a Republican, for whatever reason, you choose not to belong to a party, that should not remove your right to cast a ballot for the person who's going to, on your nickel. The elections are funded by you. We spend about $300 million a year in taxpayer money to fund our legislative elections, yet a majority of voters are told you can't vote in the election that will choose the person who will represent you in Tallahassee. And I just think that's fundamentally un-American. If you read Federalist 10, James Madison talked about factionalism. It's fundamentally wrong, and it's led to hyper-partisanship where the people who are supposed to represent people in a district don't represent the people in the district. My friend Will Weatherford, former Speaker of the House, you know Will, I talked to him yesterday. He was elected with 8% of the people who live in his district. One of my clients, Eleanor Sobel, we closed the primary because she was the most left-wing candidate. She was elected with 6% of the voters in her Senate seat. That's wrong. We should live in a country where every voter has a right to choose the person that will represent them in Tallahassee. And when I began this journey in the mid-1980s, working on campaigns and working in the process, I always thought it would be nice to join the parties together. Wouldn't it be nice if they came across the aisle once in a while and worked together? Well, the Amendment 3 campaign does just that. Both the Democratic Party, but not Democratic voters, and the Republican Party, and not Republican voters, both have opposed this initiative. Why? The chairman of the Democratic Party told me this, and you can't make this up. It takes away our power. Is anybody familiar with Florida politics? The Republicans run the show, right? And good for them. They've done a much better job campaigning, et cetera. But what power does the Democratic Party have? And this isn't about giving them, anybody power. The Republican Party, in their brief they filed in the Supreme Court, ironically said, we don't like this because this gives us too much power. So happy to answer other questions on that. But you're right, it is a private organization. But if my taxpayers are funding these elections, I should be allowed to vote in them.
Jesse, do you want to say anything on what he said right there? Or
about
anything back on this?
I mean, we can talk about the power that it is going to give to people like me. I mean, I'm happy to talk about that. Look, the Republican Party is prepared to pass whatever rules we need to pass to ensure that our votes are not diluted. Okay, so as a private organization, we own the brand, and we can determine who can run as a Republican. So for example, in 2016, there was a rule passed that said if you want to be on the ballot as a Republican candidate for president, you have to attend the Sunshine Summit. If you don't attend the Sunshine Summit, you have to pay $25,000. Don't quote me on that number, but it was a fundraising thing to get candidates to the summit or to raise money for the party. If you didn't go through those hoops, you were not on the ballot as a Republican candidate for president in the state of Florida. So we will do whatever we have to do to ensure that Democrat operatives can't go and recruit Republican candidates to run for office to dilute our vote. We've run models and seen case studies. A perfect example is the recent race for the governor of Florida. If this amendment had been in place, voters would have shown up in November, and the two people that they would have chosen between for governor is Ron DeSantis and Adam Putnam. Those would have been your choices in November for the governor of Florida. Now, I mean, I guess as a Republican, I like those changes, right? I mean, it's not a bad choice. Maybe I should support this idea, right? But look, that's not what we're at. How is that a meaningful choice? That is the most meaningless choice if a meaningful choice is legitimate options of competing ideas and ideologies. And so we look at state house seats, and anything which is within 20 points of a margin voter registration difference between the two parties is in play for people like me to go down to South Florida, form a bunch of shadow PACs if people like me wanted to, and legally shuffle money around to ensure that there were 8, 9, 10 Democrats running for an open seat and only 2 Republicans. Guess how that's going to break down? You're going to end up with 2 Republicans as the top 2 vote getters in deep blue areas. It's going to happen the same way in deep red areas. And so the difference between the two parties is going to be which party is more successful at recruiting candidates of the other party to run. We're going to make sure that that does not happen. And we're going to pass rules, which means that people like me are going to make decisions about who qualifies to run as a Republican candidate. That's what our brief said. And there's going to be, through rules changes by the parties, an unprecedented amount of you call it power, right? Well, all that we're trying to do is ensure that Democrats don't dilute our votes and don't come in and make it impossible for us to win seats. And we will do whatever it takes to ensure that that does not happen.
Steve, you want to address the governor's race?
There's so much to unpack there. Let me start with the first thing about the governor's race, because Jesse, it's just not true. Your numbers are way off. Because there was 3.7 million registered active voters in the state of Florida who are not allowed to cast a ballot in either of those primaries. If you had this system on the ballot, what you would have had is two serious, significant changes in those primaries. Significant change number one, NPA voters who are tax-paying Floridians who are duly registered voters. I'm not talking about Amendment 4 stuff. These are people who are registered active voters, were denied the right to choose one of those two candidates. Throw that 3.5 million extra voters into the mix, you have a different outcome. A. B, the candidates would have campaigned very differently. But C, let me ask you this. Looking at the candidates who emerged, should the process of our primaries, and if you disagree with me on this, it's okay to vote no. If you think the process of the primaries is to put the best representative of the two major parties and only those two people to the general election ballot, vote no on Amendment 3, seriously. But if you believe the best two people who want to represent you in Tallahassee should be in a playoff, as it were, then vote yes on Amendment 3, because that's what it would have led to. And if it would have led to Adam Putnam, who's a great guy, okay, I think Adam Putnam would have been a fantastic governor. I think Ron DeSantis has done a pretty good job too. So what's wrong with sending two Republicans to the ballot, to the thing? The second thing you mentioned about is this gamesmanship. In places, and I'm going to give you some examples of places this has happened, where we have open primaries, top two open primaries. You may have heard of places like Lake Mary. You may have heard of places like Orlando. Every city in the state of Florida, all 412, use some variant of the top two open primary system, where every voter gets to vote for your mayor, your city commission. Most counties have this, okay? And what does that mean? It means your mayor doesn't just have to answer to the far right. Your mayor doesn't just have to answer to the far left. You know the mayor of Orlando, Buddy Dyer? I remember when Buddy was in the Senate. He was the Senate Democratic leader, 100% voting record with the Democratic Party. Now, Buddy is a highly respected, well-regarded mayor of Orlando who has moved to dead center and is a good public service. Each year he gets reelected by acclamation, essentially, because all the voters in Orlando get a chance to vote on him, and he has to answer to all of those. The gamesmanship, we don't see it. It doesn't happen. It's a mythical theory. And by the way, the gamesmanship already being played in Florida elections, the race I mentioned earlier, there's an NPA candidate is a sham candidate who the Republican Party does a great job. They did it over in Senate District 3 last year, with Senate District 7, I'm sorry, where they sent 17 pieces of mail to a certain constituency, peeled off the voters. We have a thing in Florida. It's already in the Constitution. It's already in the Constitution. If only two people appear from the same party on the ballot, that goes to the general election and all voters get to vote. Already in our Constitution. But you know what we have? We have this thing called a write-in loophole. I can find my friend, doesn't even need to live in the district. My friend Jamie Grant, who just left the House, a person from Leon County, filed as a write-in candidate. I put in a candidate in a race to close a primary. You talk about gamesmanship, you close out a bunch of voters. It's legal, it's considered appropriate. You can close primaries now. These games are already happening, but where there's open primaries, where there's the top two open primary system in place, which is in almost every city in Florida, some variant of it, and many states, Florida is only one of 9 states that doesn't have some form of open primary. Isn't that crazy? But where it's in place, these games just don't materialize.
Well, Steve, let me let's be really clear here, because there's been a lot of talk about the write-in candidate and closed primaries in local races. In 2016 in Seminole County, both the clerk of the courts race and the tax collectors were decided in August with Republican voters. Democrats weren't in those races. Just recently in this last election and primary in Orange County, the sheriff was all Republicans and was won there. The property appraiser was all Democrats because of the write-in candidates. This doesn't address any of that, correct?
Unfortunately, no, because the way the Florida Constitution is written, you get to pick one strata at a time. We only had $7 million in our budget, and we had to pick one. So, and it would have been a violation of the Constitution provision of home rule to do both. So we would have had to do federal. We would have had to do three: federal one, a state one, and then a local government one. But the problem really doesn't exist as much in local government, except, as you identified, the clerk of the court, the property appraiser, is elected in these are not policy positions. These are ministerial executive positions. They're elected in closed partisan primaries, where in a Republican county, a Republican, you might cheer that, the most extreme Republican gets elected. In a Democratic, in Broward County, for example, all those constitutional officers, it's over in the primary. And most voters, when you combine the NPAs with the Republicans, most voters are legally excluded from casting their ballot for their supervisor of elections. The person who's supposed, I saw a guy with a Mets fantasy, a Gators thing. Imagine showing up at a Gators game and they say, well, they're all ACC refs. You'd be like, well, that's not fair. I mean, I know sometimes they do the trading, but if the umpire plays for the other team, that makes you feel like it's a little unfair. So,
Jesse, talk a little bit about this, because it sounds, isn't a better solution just eliminating the write-in?
There are a number of solutions to close the write-in loophole. There's also a number of solutions to open primaries, which still preserve the right of the parties and MPA candidates to get on the ballot in November. You could just say, hey, if you show up to vote in an election and you're an MPA voter, you can pick what party's primary you want to vote in. I mean, we could do that. And there's some real merit to that idea.
Do you support that idea?
I'm not opposed to it at all. So our party has not taken a position on that idea. Personally, I don't mind the idea at all. So you could even go as far as if the parties are not willing to allow MPA voters to vote in their primaries. My brother forgot to check the box. He didn't realize he was not a Republican, and he showed up. He drove all the way to Gainesville to vote in a Republican primary, and then was told, "You're not a Republican." He's like, "Yes, I am." "Yeah, but you didn't check the box." So you could even go so far as to allow a same-day change of the party affiliation. And, have an affidavit, cast a provisional ballot, it's cast like everyone else. There's a number of solutions here to deal with the problems while still guaranteeing both parties and minor parties competition in November.
Can I?
Yeah, absolutely.
Two things. One, you can't fix the write-in loophole. It's been tried. It's been tried legislatively. The courts have ruled that under the current constitutional provision, a write-in candidate is considered a legitimate candidate, even though none have ever been elected to office. No NPAs have ever been elected to a legislative or Senate seat, or obviously governor or cabinet.
So let's change the Constitution that way.
Well, so Sandy D'Alembert tried, and it was rejected because that would close only a small part of the problem. The issue of the pick a ballot option, which you referenced, that you could possibly support. Let me tell you the problem with that. We have a Bill of Rights in the U.S. Constitution called the right to associate, which means you have the right to join whichever party you want to. And this amendment protects your right to join whatever party you want to without forcing you to join a different party. We live at a time, and this is not new. I mean, this goes back to the founding of the country, where we have extremes, right? And let me just use one example. So there are Democrats who say Republicans are enemies of the state. There are Republicans who say Democrats are enemies of the state. I don't believe either one of those. However, if you're one of those Republicans that believe Democrats are the enemies of the state, would you for a minute, just to cast a ballot in a House race or a Senate race, would you for a minute join that other party and say, yeah, I want to be a Democrat? Why should you be forced to join another political party that you don't agree with just to cast your constitutionally protected right to cast a ballot? It seems wrong to me, but also if I love Jesse, and he's running for the state house, and he's my buddy. We're fraternity brothers or something. And I want to vote for Jesse. He's running in the House for a Republican seat. But my brother, who I happen to like, is running in the Senate seat. Well, guess what? I have to pick and choose which one. I either want to be a Republican to vote for my buddy Jesse, or I have to vote. I would pick Jesse, by the way. I don't really like my brother that much. But
Vote for Jesse.
That's right. But why should I be forced to join a party, either the Democratic Party or the Republican Party, which I don't agree with, just to be able to vote in a taxpayer-funded election? And Jesse talks a lot about choice. This is all about choice. You get to choose in every taxpayer-funded election. You as a voter don't have to surrender your party, don't have to change your party. You show up and you vote in a taxpayer-funded election for the people who will represent you in Tallahassee. And through that jungle primary, the top two emerge, and you get another look at them. You get two chances to vote for or against somebody, and it's been a proven system. And I'd like to talk about that in a little bit, because one of my strongest advocates is the California Chamber of Commerce. I could tell you why.
Well, we got about 5 minutes, so I was going to see if there's anybody in the audience who had a question, and if not, let's talk. Janine.
Thank you.
What would be your take as far as maintaining the integrity of our elections? I know points that you brought up, but how would, either way, how can we guarantee the integrity of our elections?
Well, let me tack on to that. The question was, how do we guarantee the integrity of our elections? And that is one of the things that I actually had, and Jesse stole my word, shenanigans that I was going to use. How do you prevent shenanigans from happening? But one of the other things I want to add into that as well is minority representation in our government. That's one of the very, very big issues, is how do you prevent shenanigans? How do you ensure minority representation? Let me go with Jesse first, since you stole my word of shenanigans.
Sure, I'll give it back if you want to.
All right, thank you.
Look, you protect. Are we talking about like minority parties or
minority representation? So, you know, one of the things that a shenanigan that could happen is, again, in an African American district or a Hispanic district, that you load it up on and split that vote and put one candidate, a Caucasian candidate, in there, and you could perhaps take away from a minority district. This is one of the things that the League of Women Voters has talked about with this race.
Yeah, look, I mean, gerrymandering districts to try to draw them to meet certain criteria is not in the purview of this particular amendment. And I think that's potentially a different discussion. I think the way that you ensure minority representation is to do good politics, which is to make a decision as to who to vote for based on the most qualified person, regardless of their race or gender or ethnicity. So for example, Republican voters in Seminole County just elected a competent, qualified Hispanic candidate to be our nominee for Congress in CD7. His name is Dr. Leo Valentin. The way that you also protect minority representation is by protecting minority parties and ensuring that they're able to participate in a meaningful way in the ballot in November. And this amendment, I just feel, does away with the guarantee of the minority party. But look, we could talk about gerrymandering. We could talk about the difference in the different ways that people think about who their candidates should be. I don't really see that being in play here at all.
You're right.
You know, and I think it is a great question. But hopefully both parties are making a decision based on the most qualified person, regardless of their ethnicity, and allowing those people to see real opportunities for leadership within any party, Republican, Democrat, or any of the smaller ones as well.
So there's two parts to your question, because I really want to talk about voter integrity, which you're right, is not really part of this initiative. But let me give you two recent examples. There was a Senate race in the southwest part of the state between Ray Rodriguez and Heather Fitzenhagen. And Heather Fitzenhagen, it was a Republican primary who had 100% voting record with the NRA, was attacked, I might say almost viciously, became personal, by Marion Hammer, well-regarded lobbyist and leader of the Florida NRA, because she never sponsored any amendments and she wasn't vocal enough on their issue. She had other things that was her priority. On the other hand, we had a Democratic primary in Southeast Florida where both candidates had constant F ratings from the NRA, but the race came down to one vote in one committee by one guy when he was in the House, where he voted not to modify, he voted not to undo parts of the Stand Your Ground law. These were two extreme examples of what we see in campaigns and primaries every single day. The far left, arguing about you, and Tina Polsky won that race with almost 70% of the vote. Their voting records were nearly identical, but one little issue, and the race was about who is the farthest to the left. And Irv Schlossberg one time voted with the Republican Party, and that killed his campaign. Heather Fitzenhagen one time voted with the Democratic Party, and that killed her campaign. Both outcomes were 70-30, and it was a race to the extremes. Okay. Now, I would say, I think in both cases, Ray Rodriguez is he'll be a fantastic senator. I think Tina Polsky will be. But the point is, they were both forced. Both of them, Ray's a pretty moderate guy, actually, but he had to run this extreme campaign. And that's the problem in Tina Polsky's race. And by the way, Tina is my client and my dear friend, hates this because she says, oh, it would have been such a different campaign. I would have had to talk, you ready for this? To every voter. I would have had to talk to NPAs. I would have had to talk to Republicans. Yeah, like the mayor of the county does, like all those folks have to do. But let me address your question about voter integrity, because it's a really important question, and you should be concerned about it. If you're voting by mail, let me offer this. Don't forget to sign your ballot, and make sure it's yours, not your spouse's, not your best friend's. This myth about changing signatures is a myth. It doesn't really affect it. Sign your outside of your ballot, seal it, and return it early. The problem, and I represent Broward County Supervisor of Elections, we had 3,000 ballots that were not counted after the primary. Why? Because people mailed them in late. If you're worried about the Postal Service, and I don't want to get into the debate over the Postal Service, most Supervisor of Elections now are having in-person drop boxes where you can bring your ballot and drop it off in their hands. So if I were voting by mail, and I will, vote, get your ballot early, don't forget to sign it. Do not give your ballot to a stranger, because the president is right. There is some voter fraud. I think he's wrong about the volume, but where voter fraud occurs is when you give your ballot to a stranger and these people harvest ballots. Okay, I've been involved in an election where an election was stolen from us in 1996 by a ballot harvester who ended up going to jail. And so turn it back in yourself. If you're worried about the Postal Service, you have two options. Put it in one of the blue collection boxes like 3 weeks out, or bring it back yourself, or have a spouse or somebody you trust bring it back and give it directly. You have a great Supervisor of Elections in Seminole County, well regarded, and by bringing it back yourself, you reduce the likelihood of any kind of fraud. Because once it's in their hands, I have to tell you, I have the highest regard for the local Supervisors of Elections constitutional office. They do a really good job. Laura Lee is a fantastic Secretary of State, and they've got really good programs in place to protect the integrity of the ballots.
Steve, we got one last question, comes from Zoom, and it talks about voter turnout. Now, our last primary election, I'm not sure what the exact numbers are, but it's somewhere between 25 and 30% of voters turned out in August for this election. In November, obviously during presidential elections, significantly more. Just Steve, real quick, if this passes, what do you think the turnout will be in a primary? How will this
Everywhere this has happened, it goes up, and there's a very simple reason. It's very simple math. 30% of the voters in that equation are not allowed to vote in the primary. Oh, wait, I'm wrong. They could have voted for the local judge. They could have voted for some city referendum that's on there, those things that don't generate turnout. But you add 30% right back into the mix. Now, I understand NPA voters pretty well. About a quarter of them will never vote in any election, but take 20 points and add that to the election, so it will increase turnout. And more importantly, listen, if you choose not to vote, that's your choice. Most voters in most state house and state senate races are legally prohibited from voting for the person who will represent them. That's why I started. You're lucky. You have two good choices, Patricia Sigmund and Jason Broder. You get to vote in one of the two competitive Senate races in the entire state. The rest of the Senate field is already laid out, and most voters didn't get a chance to choose the person who will be their senator.
Jesse, last words?
I think that some people, I think it's a lot more than the number that you said. Some people choose not to vote. It's hard for me to conceive of the fact that some people by choice only show up in general elections. I think there's this misnomer about MPAs as being moderate. Look, I've talked to 10,000 MPAs in the last 10 years, at least. I haven't found the staunch moderate who's so committed to being moderate that that's why they haven't joined either of these two extreme parties. Most people who are MPAs either forgot to check the box, or when they went to register to vote, they identify with a party. They just chose not to disclose that.
That's right.
They vote party line every time. I'll go to their door and I'll say, hey, I'm here with such and such a campaign. Their first question to me is, what's his party or what's her party? And I say, he or she is a Republican. Oh, great, I'm a Republican too. He's got or she's got our vote. Or I get a door slammed in my face because this MPA says, no, I'm a Democrat, I never vote Republican. People understand themselves, people identify with a party, they just choose not to disclose that. And the only reason that's not an issue, the only reason they haven't been forced to check the box is because they only vote in general elections. That's their choice. There's some real easy solutions for the rare case where people like my brother show up. We can fix that without this fundamental change to our process.
By the way, I completely agree with you. You're right. People do identify with party, and that person who either forgot to check the box or chose not to disclose it should not be denied the right to choose the person who's going to represent them in Tallahassee, nor should they be forced to join a party or disclose that information in order to vote for the person who will represent them. But I agree with you strongly that most people will pick one party over the other, and about a quarter of them will just never vote.
I'll tell you, Steve and Jesse, maybe your brothers should get together. But anyways, how about a nice round of applause for these guys? Gave us great insight on it. You're probably, they'll be around probably to answer some questions afterwards if you want. And at this point in time, I'm going to turn it back over to Rebecca.
Thank you guys so much. I think everybody was very entertained and learned a lot this morning. So thank you so much for your time. If you are not a member of the chamber yet, please see Pam. Pam, you want to wave? Before you leave the building, and she will credit the cost of your admission this morning if you join before you leave. And I have a door prize this morning. This beautiful tower of goodies from Ace Human Resources, and the winner is Mike Brockman. You'll see event flyers that were at your seats with our upcoming events. We have a lot happening this month. We have the Lake Mary State of the City, legislative update, and the last professional women's luncheon of the year. They are all both in person and on Zoom events, so you can attend either way you'd like. They are selling out quickly for in person, so please register as soon as possible. Please know that your health and the safety of everyone that attends our events is our top priority. So thank you for adhering to the guidelines. Thank you to the Lake Mary Event Center for accommodating our new setup. And thank you sponsors, Mid-Florida Credit Union, Next Horizon, Highland, Waste Pro, and J. Wayne Miller Company for sponsoring. Have a great Seminole County day.